Welcome on inside yet another edition of the Business of Social podcast powered by SCN Digital. My name is David Brickley, and we are breaking down, as we do each and every year, the recap episode for 2022. It was a jam-packed year with so many people, so many brands that joined us on the show. Of course, we had the mini pods and we had, some value we dropped intermittently throughout the year, but no shows are better than, of course, our interviews with experts. So, man, KDO, if you're on the mic here, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Amazing. So KDO, our tech producer, what was great about this year, I think, was not only did we learn from Fortune 500 brands and the marketing do's and don'ts and getting really knee deep in the social, but a lot of leadership, mental health, all those things I think that we're all navigating as we enter this new remote era. So I think it was a really good combination, right, of the leadership, mental health, team building alongside the tried and true social media marketing best practices.
Yeah, when I was going through all these clips, the one thing that really struck me was there was a lot of human connection underneath all of the advice, whether it was about posting or reaching audiences, building a better community within your own office. It was a lot of like the human connection and engagement element.
Yeah, and I think as I get further and further in my career and as we grow here at STN as well, I'm starting to understand really, the algorithm hacking and the day-to-day management and how to hop on features and trends and all those things are so vital. But ultimately, to have success as a team, you need goals, KPIs, a safe workplace, a motivated staff that can come to you with problems and help find solutions. So it really starts from the top, and that's why I think this program does a good job of hopefully being that tool for leaders out there to succeed, not just on social, not just with your marketing campaigns, but succeed as a team and with your brand. So we're going to run through and give you the top tips and top highlights from 2022. All right, Katie, so let's jump right into it. I want to start with episode 79 in your dial, of course, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you want to go back and listen to a really good conversation we had with, CMO of Airtime, but she had previous stops at Amazon, at Twitter. Tatiana Simonian is just a really great marketer, so much success in the industry. And we pulled this clip, Katie, because I think it was one of the top moments of the show, how it's okay to fail as a marketer. You mentioned it's okay to fail hard as a marketer. What do you mean by that?
So this came from my friend Erin, who was one of the first 300 at Facebook. And she told me how, and so it was like probably 10, 15 years ago, we were having a conversation and she was talking about how, not 15 because they haven't been around 15, but like he was telling me how they had a motto internally in the early days that was fail harder. And I think that when you get to the point as a marketer where everything is a hit every time is your goal, your goals aren't big enough.
Yep.
You need to try some stuff and have it totally fail. And maybe 50% fail so that you can look at that strategy and go, okay, this part and this part was great, but let's change these two things.
I love that. And we had some conversations this year and previous years too, where as marketers, setting a bucket aside, call it 10%, call it 15%, where you're just going to throw some Hail Marys and be okay and make sure you let your leadership team know, like, hey, we're going to try some things. We may strike out, we may fail, but we're going to try to hit a grand slam with some of these marketing campaigns. And, as long as we're not totally being derogatory or doing something that's terrible for our audience, I think you're allowed to take those swings. And as you know, big swings equal big misses, but also big swings can equal home runs, grand slams, all those things, sports analogies. Here we go. All right, so moving on. Episode 80 was Zach Honavar, and he's a founder and CEO of One Day Entertainment and Creator Now. Man, does he know his game when it comes to creators. You may know them as influencers, and how to maximize those with your brand. So I asked him, what's the best bang for your buck on social? And as marketers, what should we be paying attention to right now? If you're a brand trying to get the best bang for your buck, where are you going?
TikTok, by far, bar none, Amen. Hands down. I think the other one
is TikTok and then find a highly coveted TikTok influencer to partner with? Like, where do you go first, or just
no TikTok micro influencers from 50,000 followers to 250,000 followers? DM them, offer them to get free product and a small cash incentive. Most of them are just going to be happy to get their hands dirty with a brand partnership. And I think like if you can get that and be able to find a bunch of those accounts. The hard part is finding a bunch of those accounts. But if you can, I think that's really undervalued right now.
Yeah, sit down, DM 25 of them, work with 7, you'll be amazed at the reach you can get. All right, I love when we get that tangible advice. I literally go to influencers, 100 to 250,000, DM them. I love when we get that tangible, let me go out and use this advice immediately with my brand. If you haven't checked it out already, check out our webinar, a podcast as well. 14 ways that you can really succeed and crush it on TikTok in 2023. And although me and Zach had that conversation earlier, much earlier in 2022, that advice still rings true. And you really need to pay attention to that platform and really make sure that you're leveraging it with your brands. Okay, we're going to move on to episode 81. Great conversation with Dr. Jen Osborne and Scott Kapari. They're over there at the University of Georgia, go Dogs. And I really wanted to talk to somebody that's educating the next generation of marketers and how they're approaching that. It was a great conversation because they're looking at it from a lesson plan standpoint, how they can really teach this from the top down. And I asked the question, in their opinion, because they look at all the research, look at all the best case studies and scenarios, how can you rebuild a brand on social? Put your consultant hat on for me. If I'm a Walmart or I'm Arby's or I'm a bigger brand that wants to re-look at how I build my marketing and direct-to-consumer social team, what's that look like? Like, what have you seen be successful?
All right, my consultant hat says we want to look at a 70-20-10 type situation. Okay. 70% of your resources, that's money, that's headcount, that's all resources, should go towards doing the marketing things that you know should be done that will help you meet your organizational objectives. 20% should be working specifically on innovation, new ideas, things that have some promise. And you should have 10% of your resources going towards the crazy, not sure if it's going to work, but we should try it, agile approach to really, but if you keep it in that 70-20-10, you're not going to be reckless. You're going to definitely meet your objectives, but you're going to have some room to innovate, push the industry forward, be viewed as a leader.
Love that by Dr. Jen Osborne. So that 70-20-10 split, I think directly correlates to what Tatiana was teaching us for our first highlight that we shared on this episode, which is, you need that bucket where you're experimenting, and it's okay to fail hard as a marketer. I think in that breakdown, anywhere from 10 to 30% really is that stuff. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't have the data to guarantee that our audience loves this stuff, but we're going to try some things out and kind of swing for the fences like I talked about earlier. Moving on to episode 82, Jenny Lee Fowler. She's a director of social and strategy at MIT. I mean, we all know MIT, right? So MIT, if I know anything about them, they look at data, they look at studies, they know their stuff. So I asked her as a director of social at MIT, how can you measure success and how does she measure success and ROI on digital? How do you measure success and ROI on digital? And do those things also ladder up to total recruitment goals and kind of more of those traditional goals for the university? How do you kind of look at the end of the year and say, wow, we crushed it, or wow, we need to do better?
I always look at engagements. Engagements is where I'm always looking to expand our engagements, because if I've found anything, engagements will stretch your reach, and your reach will introduce you to new people.
Yep.
So engagements one, and then I always look for sort of those comments where there's someone that might say, "Oh, I didn't realize you had this class," or "I didn't realize that you had a school of humanities," or because that means that I'm introducing our content to a new person that didn't realize we existed, or we didn't have that program. So those are sort of like the very specific, valuable engagements or comments that I'm looking for.
Engagement. I love that. Moving on to episode 83, one of my favorite conversations of the year. CEO to CEO is always a fun one because you just learn so much from each other. And Davis and I have had multiple conversations since this episode, just kind of picking each other's brains. And Davis, if you're listening, I appreciate all the book recommendations you sent me as well. But he's the founder and CEO of Cotopaxi, and talk about an organization that is all about giving back, all about making sure that they have those give back efforts ingrained in their culture. So I knew for a fact that in this remote world, his company is now 100% remote, that he has really dug deep into how to build culture and connection. There's a reason we pay $16 for a cocktail, because humans ultimately want to be around other humans in some way, shape, or form. So you can't just cut that completely out. And I think I noticed with the culture, innocent mistakes, miscommunication, just things, maybe trust isn't built because all you are on is Slack and Zoom calls. But it seems like you figured that part out too. It's the summer camps, it's the annual retreats, it's those regional meetups. Because as I talk to my staff too, 2 years after the pandemic, they all say more in person, more satellite offices, like they want to be around their people more.
I think the risk with hybrid is that you don't do anything well. And so when we committed to being like 100% virtual, it was like, this is it. We've got to figure this out because there's no other choice. Every quarter, we do these innovation tournaments. We've done those from the beginning of the company, and they actually work better virtually than they did in person. We've done virtual hiking where we have like a Zoom meeting, the same slot every week for an hour. You can go out and walk around the block, or you can go on a trail. Yeah. It allows everyone to kind of go outside and connect with each other.
Love those tidbits of advice, because ultimately, whether it's hybrid, whether it's fully remote, finding ways on a quarterly basis to get away from the work and compete, fun games, trivia, innovation, Olympics for your company or your department. Although it was not really part of the game plan just a few years ago, boy, oh boy, is it important as you build that connection with your employees and your staff. Moving right along here to my guy, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Dapper Labs, Dave Feldman, a multi-appearance guest. Is that a better way to say it? But always enjoy our conversations. And if you're interested at all in NFTs, Web 3.0, I love this episode because it really is like a one-on-one crash course into NFTs. And Dave does a great job of breaking it down in layman's terms so anybody can understand, and you can bring those learnings back to your leadership team or back to your team. But he broke down really what to tell somebody when it comes to good brand equity. What do you, if again, you're a consultant, a brand brings you in, Fortune 500 brand, whether it's someone that has good equity, right? Like brand equity in terms of fashion or whatever it may be. What are you telling them right now about this space and how they should capitalize like now?
I would say to be really thoughtful to, like if this is something that you should be doing to up-leveling your relationship with your consumers or your fans or however you define that user base, and to not rush and to do something that's going to like make their affinity towards you to strengthen that versus something that like will feel like transactional. And so what is it that this brand can do to heighten their relationship with their consumer versus it seeming like some sort of like cash grab or just quick buck?
I really love that thought by Dave, because I think anytime something comes out, right, whether it's a new platform like Clubhouse or Be Real, or obviously NFT and Web 3.0, a lot of CMOs, a lot of executives love the sexy terms, right? We're in the metaverse, we're doing NFTs, we're doing Be Real. And ultimately, you have to understand, is this going to help our consumer? Is this going to be a value add? Or are we just trying to jump on trends to hopefully strike gold? And I think that's such a great piece of advice in the macro, but also when it came to NFT and we saw how it was super hot and then the crash, but God, is like Web 3.0 here to stay, and also, the marketplace and where we're all going with these digital economies is no doubt the future. But man, just some good advice overall there by Dave Feldman. All right, so we move on to one of my favorite brands, Oakley. We brought on David Burkett and Antonio Bonifacio. A great panel interview as they both oversee different sides of the fence at Oakley. I know David spent a lot of time over at Nike. Antonio's been at Oakley, Luxottica, I think for 15 years. He invited me to his headquarters in New York. Really, really good dude. But they both broke down for me and the audience what apparel brands specifically, what they think they get wrong and the mistake they're seeing across social media. I know both of you are students of the space and you're watching what's going on with different apparel brands, whether they're competitors or not. So Antonio, I'll start with you. What do you think brands get wrong when it comes to marketing their product, trying to connect to the consumer? What have you seen?
My personal experience, that something can go wrong when you are trying to do a little bit of everything.
Ooh, I like that.
So
yeah.
In our space, especially on the sport apparel, I mean, we can stay here and talk about days about who is the competitor of what and how and which space, right? I think it all comes to focus and priorities. I'm gonna say very, very, very straight. So focus and priorities. not only where the dollars are, where the main buyer is going to dictate your budget, but it's really about the consumer that you're targeting, and really what are the 2 or 3 priorities that you want to drive as a brand, and where do you want to have a voice.
Great stuff from David and Antonio. Moving on to episode 86, Kiera Kempinski, the VP of Global and Consumer Marketing at The Knot. If you have been to any wedding over the last 5 to 10 years, I feel like you have RSVP'd via The Knot. I can guarantee you that. And just brought her on for all her expertise, but we really got into this idea of brand messaging over a period of time. You assume everybody knows the lingo. They know your product offering. They know that you also offer this and that. And understanding that like you only have a small amount of time with the consumer and you got to be able to get it away very quickly and make them understand very quickly what your value prop is so important. And I think sometimes you just get too close to the brand and you feel, oh yeah, they already know that. Like, no, they don't know that.
Yeah, it's true. But, I think about us too, where we're, a heritage brand. We've been around for 25 years, right? And what was our offering then is not our offering now.
Right.
And so that evolution, right, and that maturity as product lines roll out and you kind of build from there, that can shift as well. But how do you not make it an and you might need to make it an or, right? Around what is your lead message at any given time? Because very easily you can see brands that like, we were known for this thing, and then we're going to add on this thing, and now it's about this thing, which is a struggle as well.
Great stuff from Kiera, and I love that so much, and I think it's important to like pause, double click on that as a new analogy or a new term I'm hearing these days. But really constantly educating your consumer, not assuming they already know something, but also over a period of time, if you branded yourself in a certain way, or you're known for one product and you're trying to launch a new product, understand the evolution with your consumer and reinforcing who you are, what you stand for as a brand. That's super important. You don't have to necessarily shove it down people's throats every single post, every single campaign. But I love that idea of, the work is never done. You're constantly educating, re-educating, repeating yourself, and making sure that ultimately when you stop somebody on the street and you ask them about your brand, that the right terminology and the right tagline, whatever it may be, comes up. Moving on to episode 87, really wanted to dig into the footwear space. What you're seeing, I think, this year in the 2022 recap episode is we jumped around, right? From apparel to footwear to sports to team building to culture. And this one was no different. Justin Snyder, the founder and CEO, a lot more CEOs this time around as we continue to grow the Business of Social podcast of Wolf and Shepherd. And he talked about really a lot of the success that he's seen with the brand is the storytelling aspect on social media. Where's the undervalued attention, or where's the space or the campaigns or the omnichannel part of marketing that you don't think enough brands focus on that ends up bearing a great fruit?
So I think it's messaging. Storytelling is the biggest thing that most brands compromise in their pursuit of growing to some level of scale.
100%. And I think not focusing on upper funnel marketing, going straight to lower funnel and just beating people over the head with like, I don't even know who you are. Why are you selling to me? Right.
But that's the thing is there's pressure. Like for us, we're very fortunate. We don't have any large institutional backers on our cap table. So we're owned by individuals. And it's allowed us to have the freedom to kind of explore and kind of continue to drive brand equity and our brand storytelling. And that ultimately is what's, I think, can allow us to be a global brand.
Loved my conversation with Justin, and so true when it comes to really, find a way to pull on those emotional heartstrings of your consumer, of your target demo that may not know about your brand, whether it's through laughter, whether it's through a heartfelt message, but understand the story. And we had a conversation, I think, not in 2022, Katie, but in 2021 with Patagonia. And he said, even when there's not a story, there's a story of the manufacturing of the product and how they find the fabric. And there's always a story to every product. And you can always find a way to make that connection so it feels more real and not just kind of hitting you over the head with a call to action. All right, so let's move to episode 88, a really amazing conversation we had with Tom Weingart. He was the head of social overtime. He now has since been promoted to Chief Growth Officer. I like to say, the Business Social Podcast maybe helped with the resume a little bit, the LinkedIn edition. And I don't know, maybe the powers that be saw him in a greater light. Ha ha, he. I'm just kidding, of course. But no, I had a great conversation with Tom. We obviously invited him back on to the TikTok webinar I mentioned earlier in the program, the 14 Ways to Crush It on TikTok in 2023. But he had again, I love when we get those amazing anecdotes and or the tangible takeaways you can listen to the podcast and immediately go try on your brand handles. And he talked about this idea of mini pods, these 60 to 90 second clips that are really working well right now on TikTok. I guess what amount have you seen where if the brand's like, hey, Tom, I trust you in the team, as long as we get some type of mention, we're cool. What's ideal and what works with your audience where it's not like too salesy or too over the top or the audience doesn't agree with it?
We have created like what we call micro pods. So we're a little late to the podcast game.
Yeah.
Our audience doesn't really watch like hour to 2 hour long shows. So instead of like going all in on that, we're like, hey, why don't we just make TikTok podcasts basically? Like, so we have I think it's like 18 different TikTok channels at this point that are just like little podcasts. So it's a 60-second segment. Who's better, Kyrie or Luka, whatever. And we'll go talk about it. And I found it way easier to integrate a brand into it.
So if you haven't already, try it out. Try it out with your talent internally, externally, but the mini pods are working for overtime, working for a lot of brands. All right, so we move on to episode 89. Leslie Koch is the VP of social media at TelevisaUnivision. And we talked about how to market authentically to a Hispanic audience. So I want to have you drop some knowledge on the listeners because a lot of marketers, they want to increase their presence in that US Hispanic demo. What's a common mistake you see brands doing that are trying to enter this demographic that maybe get it wrong? Like what are some things that brands get wrong when they make this goal?
I think there's a couple of things. One would be saying, oh, a lot of US Hispanics are acculturated, so I can just reach them with my general market campaign in English. So while it's true that a lot of US Hispanics are born in the US, that Spanish language is still a really important emotional connector. I think the second thing is just recycling the same ad in Spanish. We have a team that works with advertisers to create more culturally relevant edits of their existing commercials. So for example, they might have a commercial with a mom and daughter for the US, and for the Hispanic market, we added grandmother. So like that kind of cultural insight, I think is really important.
Good stuff from Leslie. Let's move on to episode 90. Lance Trube is a manager in social of earned media over at Microsoft. And I really love this idea that he implements with his team. And I'll let him share really the mantra of how he approaches team building and leadership of his direct subordinates.
I have a lot of kudos and applause to give our leaders internally. We talk about at Microsoft, we have a couple of principles for managers of people. 3 of them are just coach, model, and care. And like in moments of tragedy, we really got to dial up that care side, and make sure that people feel cared for, that the business can pause for a minute. We can talk about how you're doing, recognize that people aren't showing up as, robots to do their jobs, and they have real things. So we've spent a lot of time over the past couple of years thinking about how to care for our people. I think particularly social practitioners have it rough. I mean, you're in the trenches. You see the best and worst of human nature play out on these feeds.
We move on to episode 91. Jason Del Soldado is the head of product at Kane Footwear, also the co-founder of Clinch Golf, spent years and years at Nike and did some really, really great work. You know what? I love this. I want to pull this quote. There's a lot of great things that he brought to the table in terms of his history at Nike, how he approaches Kane Footwear and Clinch Golf. But this idea of staying calm in the midst of chaos was one of my favorite. One of my favorite quotes is being positive in a negative situation isn't naive, it's leadership. In that moment where you have millions of dollars worth of jerseys on its way and you got this stuff going on in the news, it's like, all right, this really sucks and this is not ideal and we're going to stay late tonight, but let's at least, like you said, what do we have at our disposal? How can we start chipping away at this rock to make some progress?
It was just really just trying to take a breath, because sometimes, like I said, the enormity of the situation can really just kind of paralyze you, and you really just need to be like, okay, and your training kicks in, or your experience kicks in, and you go, okay, this is how we have to solve this. This is where we should start. You get input from the team, the other experts in your world, and you put all that into the blender and you come up with a plan.
Episode 92 was Tina Studervant, and she's the director of talent D&I over at The Athletic. Really dove into not only how to recruit effectively, how to empower people of color within your organization, but really how to make sure diversity and inclusion is something that you're approaching the right way. in 2022 and beyond. And I love how she really, buttoned all this up for us when it comes to not only how to approach DEI, but how to build up employees in your company and give them areas of ownership.
I think people start off with the best intentions. And I think that DEI is so much more than just hiring a person and filling a body. It's what are you doing once that person is in the door? And I think that that's where a lot of places get things wrong, is not offering support for your employees, considerations around inclusion and belonging for employees. And then also, like, how are we developing people? It is very, very easy to just hire somebody and get them in the door to fill whatever I need to hire more of these sorts of folks or these sorts of folks or whatever, right? Like, people aren't check boxes by any means. And so it's like, is it we need, more women because engineering is a predominantly male field, right? Something like that. But then it's like, okay, so then what are you doing if you hire somebody at an entry level or even mid-level and you go, how do I help them go to the next step?
And finally, we've already done 14 clips. So the 15th highlight or the top tips that we found from 2022 will end with episode 93 as we go in chronological order, of course. Liz Beecroft, she's a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. She is the owner of MENTL.SESH, and she works with athletes. She works with, people that work in the social media industry. So it's such a great conversation. I really recommend everybody listen to this one. But she really gave some great advice for leaders coaching employees that are dealing with mental health. So there's you want to support your team, you want to be there for mental health, you want to check in on them, but you also don't want to advise and coach them on how to get through maybe a slight depression or whatever may be going on. So what is your advice for people leaders, knowing that everybody on a team at some point is going to probably go through some mental health dilemmas? How do you coach them to be a safe place for their team to go to?
Yeah, this is a great question, and actually something that I did a lot of during the pandemic. I actually did a lot of consulting and internal trainings with different companies on mental health in the workplace because, it shifted for a lot of people. And what I think is really important is really facilitating a healthy workplace environment when it comes to mental health. Do you model those behaviors that you're also preaching and talking about? How do you display healthy work-life boundaries? Because there are so many unspoken standards that leaders can set, whether they're aware of it or not. And even though they might deem themselves as a hustler, having a hard, great work ethic, you're still setting that silent example and standard of what you might expect your employees. So one, being sure that what you're sharing, you're also modeling in that behavior and you're creating a safe environment that way. Two, that you're informed on, some of these topics when it comes to mental health. You don't have to be an expert in that, but knowing how to use the correct language, not using mental health diagnoses as adjectives is a really big one. Creating a space where, if an employee were to come and share some of their struggles with you, that you have some resources that you can direct them in the right position. Just being there to sometimes listen and, hear them out goes such a long way. You don't have to have, the answers or be the expert, and that's totally fine. And I think what I, talk a lot about with a lot of companies, and one common theme is, the idea of having a trauma-informed mindset in the workplace. I think it's so crucial. Looking at a situation or a colleague who might be having a bad day through the lens of, what's happening right now in your life.
There it was, the top 15 moments of 2022. I mean, there was a lot more moments there. It's so hard to pick, and I would never go, hey, this is the top moment of the entire year. We just went chronologically there, but I love how we were able to give you a top clip that we found a lot of value, and you can go back and listen to these shows, right? So tried to give you the episode number, obviously the guest, and highly recommend if any of those highlights, you're like, God, I would love to hear more on that topic, or I really like how this person broke that down. You can go back on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and listen to the full show. We love doing this each and every year, kind of recapping you the top moments from all the episodes from the previous year. We hope you found a lot of value out of that. And thank you so much for listening to this recap episode. This has been yet another edition of the Business and Social Podcast. My name is David Brickley, and it's all been powered by STN Digital.
you.